As for the questions, I need to go through them and analyze them and see if there was a particular question that everyone missed. But because the highest grade was a uh, 84, um, and a lot of people did not do so good, I am going to bump everyone's grade by 16 points. So it was the first time I've actually done the midterm this way um, on web access. I don't know if that had something to do with it, but the grades are definitely lower than they've been in the past. Um, I'll look at that. There was a time. It was a tighter time limit than there has been in the past. That may have had something to do with it as well. I will look at the individual questions and let you know. I know everyone wants to see what questions they missed, and I guess the web access doesn't show you that. So I will definitely show you that. Okay. Any other questions before we get started? All right. Let's see. I'm going to be in the lab this Thursday. If anyone's interested, I'll be there. Any questions or help with your labs, I'll be there. Um, and tonight we're going to talk about triggers and metadata. It's actually probably going to be a fairly short webinar, as you know, there wasn't a lot of there's not a lot of material here, so there's only 4 YouTubes, which puts it probably around an hour. Um, but we'll I'm going to go through some highlights on triggers briefly, and then I'll do a Q&A session for those that want to do that. Let me. Any questions yet before we get started? Okay. Not seeing any questions come through, so we'll talk about triggers. Triggers are a very important thing, actually. They are events. If anyone's familiar with sort of an event uh, that can happen if you've done any object-oriented programming or event-driven programming, like JavaScript or some other language, you may know what an event is. But an event is essentially something that happens, and it basically executes a stored routine, not directly from the programmer calling it from their client program, but the event that happens on the database causes a routine to fire indirectly, and it's also guaranteed that it will always happen as well. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at this. All right. So again, I'm not going to go through the whole thing because it's on the YouTubes already. Talk about a couple of highlights, and then we'll move on from there. So the important thing about a trigger, it's written very similar to a stored routine, but the main difference is that a trigger is not called automatically. You don't directly call it. And I think when we get into some client-server stuff, we'll see this a little bit more, because I'll show you how a stored procedure can be called from, say, a Java or PHP program. And then we will also talk about how the trigger is actually executed um, indirectly by something happening. And those indirect things, in the case of MySQL, you've only got a few events that can trigger, cause a trigger to execute, and it's essentially an insert, delete, or update command. So when you write a trigger and it's based on a delete, update, or insert on a particular table, you can tell the trigger to execute, and it will. There are different trigger types. Does anyone have any questions on the different trigger types? I don't want to go into the whole thing because it was on the YouTubes already. But you've basically got a before or after, insert, update, and delete. General rules are that anything you want to do as far as enforcing whether that statement is even valid to continue or not would be before, and if you just want to audit some changes or something, that would be after. Because only a before trigger can stop an insert, for example, from happening, or a delete or an update from happening. Other than that, that they're basically written the same way stored procedures are written. You just give the rules as to what it executes on, and either before or after, and the rest of it is more or less the same. It gives an example of it. Basically, this example here was looking to see if the customer's balance was above their credit limit. Then it was just putting a record into a so we have a question here. Is a trigger like a try catch in Java? No, it's not. Not at all. A trigger is more like an event. If you've ever done event programming, you know that you can write an event that says on click. So if someone clicks on something, go do this, right? That's an event. I don't know if anyone's ever done any sort of event programming, but it's an event, really. If those of you are familiar with that term, it's an event, and basically means when something happens, do this, right? And it's which is a little different than a stored procedure, because it is executed and controlled completely by the database. So it's not a try-catch block in Java. So one of the events here that happened here was that if you updated the customer table and you set the balance to exceed the credit limit, it would simply do an insert into a debit balance report. So this trigger wasn't executed automatically, but the process of updating the customer table caused this trigger to be executed. So triggers are indirectly called. We would say that stored routines, including stored procedures and functions, are directly called by the user or the client program, and triggers are indirectly called. This needs to be updated here. Using a trigger to stop an invalid transaction. The signal command now exists in MySQL, and it works really well. MySQL 5.5 cleared up a few issues with stored procedures, and the signal command was actually one of them. I don't know if I think I might have had some notes basically saying that, making an adjustment. If not, we'll look at it, and so ignore this thing. I need to remove this MySignal completely. I'm not sure if in last year's YouTubes I actually said that the signal command now works. This is MySQL 5.1. We're on 5.5 now, and the actual signal command works. Does anyone know offhand if I demoed the new signal command in last year's videos? Old and new are basically before and after snapshots of the data. Old having the old values, new having the new data values. And again, triggers, you don't call them directly, they're indirectly called, right? There are some restrictions on them. I did the kludge last year too, huh? Did I demo the correct way of doing it? I mean, the new way, the 5.5 way of doing it?